Hi, this is Rob Kramarz, founder of Intelliversity. We're here again with innovative Neuro Technologies. The founders are Vince Simmons. Is it Simmon or Simmon?
Simmon.
Simmon, the CEO, and Shawn Mojtahedian, who's the Chief Scientific Officer. The product is a series of products that attack the tau protein complex intracellularly. Oh boy, that's a tough one. Intracellularly, right? Which is a novel approach to Alzheimer's. Really interesting. And of course, our conversation relates to their experience in raising capital and informing their team, because the team is the most important element in raising capital. And we want to just remind you that this is a training video for entrepreneurs and hopefully investors, and it's not an offer to sell securities or a solicitation for you to buy securities. So returning to what I want to focus on in the last segment is the most interesting topic, which is what you gentlemen are doing to reduce the perceived risk to the investor. I'll start with Vince this time. Name the first strategy that you were implementing to reduce the risk to the investor.
Well, the first strategy was really taking a look at the time frame from when we began the project and got funding to when we might get a return for investors, and trying to shorten that as much as possible.
So-called early exit.
An early exit. But a part of that strategy was also to reduce the amount of money required to get to that point.
Okay.
That was critical. So rather than building a company with a secretary and a staff and lab scientists who are working on a project, we're outsourcing all of this work with an experienced management team supervising.
Okay.
And that cuts the size of the risk down. And then what we've observed in the last few years is that the pharma companies are actually looking for earlier stage projects than they had been in the past, so that they are willing to take on a project at an earlier stage, put in some upfront money, fund additional research, and we've actually identified a couple of pharmaceutical companies that are interested in that approach if we get to a certain stage. Getting to that stage is the money we're talking about.
All right. So are you talking to venture capitalists, to so-called super angels, to angel groups, to just casual investors, private individuals? Where do you think the source of money is going to be?
Right now, we have talked to virtually all those groups that you've mentioned at one level or another. We've had some frustration, we mentioned, at getting their full attention, but we think now we're getting to the point where we can overcome some of that with perhaps some government funding.
Okay. So your next phase is, having licensed the technology from a university, is to go in for yet another round of grant funding, SBIRs?
That's one of the sources, absolutely.
Okay. And what specifically would the grant cover?
Well, what we need to do, and been told by several pharmaceutical companies that'd like to see us do, is go from the stage of having a hypothesis that if we develop these two therapies we're talking about, that would have an impact in an animal model. And that research would cost us on the order of $100,000 to $200,000.
So there are grants available for animal studies of promising drug candidates?
Yes, there are.
Interesting.
Yes, there
So
are.
how far does the grant, this is interesting, how far does the grant process take you in a drug candidate?
Yeah. Well, we believe it would take us to evaluation of our two products in the animal model based on various forms of memory behavior that would be tested. So this involves getting animals of the right type that have memory diseases based on tau, human tau that's been genetically engineered into them, and then testing them behaviorally and in various well-accepted animal models, and showing that the therapies actually reduce the cognitive decline that's seen in those animal models in the absence of treatment.
Is it your experience that grant money is available to other biotech companies or early pharma companies to do additional animal testing beyond the early laboratory work? Is that the general rule that
The
SBIR
NIH,
funding is?
yeah, I think the NIH has increasingly recognized that while they've been great at developing and funding early stage science, that getting this to patients has been difficult. And so they're providing support to small companies like our own
I see.
for not only
Outside the university environment.
outside of the university environment, not only for testing to determine whether or not the drug shows effects, but also actually with some of the toxicology costs, for example, that
Right.
you would need to do in order to get into the clinic.
I see. And how much money typically do you think is available from the NIH on an SBIR grant basis? Am I
You're on target.
Right.
stating that correctly? For animal testing outside of the university, for a company such as yours?
Well, traditionally, the SBIR, STTR programs have been available to phase 1, phase 2 programs. Phase 1 is normally about $150,000, and phase 2 is up to about $1 million. I actually been in contact with NIH recently. They are expanding their phase 1 budget to $350,000 because they realize for drug development efforts, there needs to be more.
But a company outside of the university setting, you know.
Usually in
Is
those
the same
SBIR,
programs are available?
yes,
To you guys?
yes.
And is that
Usually there's a
Is that a new
collaboration.
thing? Oh, you have to collaborate with a.
Usually there is a collaboration. It's not an absolute requirement, but usually there is.
So you'll have to collaborate with the lab that you originally licensed the technology from?
Not necessarily the same lab. One of the beauties right now of this environment is we can collaborate with various experts within the academic arena, not necessarily from the origin of the technology, but other major universities in the country, because the SBIR program is about translation of that technology, and the company can work with the lab to move forward. A portion of the work being done at the academic lab, and a portion being outside.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so let's identify one of, it's very, very valuable information. Let's identify one other risk reduction strategy that you're implementing so that investors will be more encouraged to work with you. We've talked about CROs. We've talked about NIH grants. Is it only NIH or?
No, there are advocacy things like the Alzheimer's Association
right.
and things of that type as well, which do funding to small companies.
And the other thing that you mentioned to me earlier was the concept of breaking the product line up into a number of products and attempting to, and productizing them one by one and licensing or selling
Rights to.
the rights to the first one as quickly as possible in order to fund the later stage, the later products in the pipeline.
To address your question regarding the mitigation of risk, obviously we talked about the CROs and our academic collaborations, and yes, we have talked to some of the major foundations, including Alzheimer's Drug Discovery. Tau is a large protein, which means that it's not only Alzheimer's that it has a role in. So one of the thoughts that we had is taking these targets and applying them to different diseases.
So there'd be other sources, other grants for different diseases.
Like Parkinson's, for
Right.
example.
Okay. Well, good, great. I'd like to have you, in the time we have, share anything else that you feel the entrepreneurial audience could benefit by in terms of in conquering this very challenging investment environment.
Well, I think the main thing is you start with a plan, you've got to be flexible, you have to see if that plan works. If it doesn't, you have to be ready to change it to make it acceptable, not only to yourself still, maintaining your own identity within that, but also to your potential investors.
Shawn?
I would say the key point, as Vince mentioned, is adaptability. This is survival of the fittest, and we're both biologists by training. Don't repeat the same mistakes. Come up with new solutions to the problem.
Well, that's interesting. We've oftentimes talked about how important adaptability is in the success of a company. In fact, this week's blog in the Successful Entrepreneur blog will be on that very subject, is how quickly can a company iterate and reevaluate its strategy before it begins to scale. Thank you very much. So this is Intelliversity signing off for today, having interviewed innovative Neuro Technologies, CEO Vince Simmon, and CSO Shawn Mojtahedian. it would be really a shame if I mispronounced it at the end of the segment, but we got it right. We'll see you next time. Thank you very much.